Welcome to Map Design 101, where we talk about the finer details of map and area design to show how they make the gaming experience better or worse. Whether you're a designer or merely want to know why you love or hate the maps you do, this resource is for you. This week we're talking about a small but important detail when it comes to polishing up a map, using terrain to flag bigger mechanics. This is a step that comes after designing much of the encounter, but shows a level of polish that can teach new players some fundamental ideas of the encounter without them even knowing it. Now, what do I mean by flagging mechanics? Well, when a fight or strategic encounter occurs, there are usually zones that are important, be they safe spots, tactical positions, hidden items, and so on. A good map designer can place terrain objects or use the design on the terrain as clues to guide a player without them needing to look things up out of the game. One simple yet effective example of flagging terrain is Floorspar Oath, Chapter 13 Ephraim of Fire Emblem The Sacred Stones. Selena is a stationary boss, but the game doesn't artificially give her zero move like future Fire Emblems would to make that clear. She has Bolting Tome, allowing her to attack up to 10 tiles away. Looking at her attack range doesn't tell you the actual safe spots, but looking at the arena can. There are forest tiles due north and due west of her position that mark the limits of her range. It's then relatively simple for a player to draw a diagonal line between them to know that that is the limit of her bolting range, all while working within the mechanical limits of the game. This is also the first time a player playing Ephraim Route blind will encounter an enemy with a long-range tome, teaching them that, while they have a very long range, it isn't infinite. Plus, a cautious player is given the avoid boost of the forest terrain to utilize if they want to spend 5 turns baiting out the limited uses of her tome before proceeding. The game enforces none of this behavior, but merely by placing forest tiles at the tip of her range, it offers these options to the player. For a different example, desert maps in Fire Emblem often contain hidden treasures. While the specific location of the treasure is never shared directly with the player, there are often terrain doodads like bones or cliffs that can help draw attention and break up the map. Some hidden items are usually placed next to these terrain features, while others, if a player knows their location, can be more easily located and remembered from a reference by finding what terrain features they line up with. But map design flagging mechanics can go beyond tactics games. Final Fantasy XIV, an MMORPG, has boss fights that are considered intricate dances of mechanics, where much of the challenge is figuring out where to move at what time to avoid damage. This can be a lot for a new player to learn and remember, but most of the arenas have hints or tells at what the designers thought would be a good solution to many of their mechanics. One example of this is in the Savage fight against Themis. Many of its mechanics will throw several lethal area of effect attacks at the party in quick succession, but you can subdivide the arena into zones using the lines and diamonds on the floor for easy reference. The beginning of Letter of the Law, for instance, will spawn orbs of light and darkness at 4 points in the room, and mirrors of light and darkness on the edges. One set will explode for damage, the other will be safe, based on the boss's tell when starting the cast. When taking this all in at once, it can be overwhelming for even a player who knows what color is safe to know where to stand. But if you know that the orbs will always spawn on these X shapes, and the mirrors will always align so one of the side wedges on left or right are safe, it makes the mechanic far easier to resolve. And tricks like this exist across the vast majority of high encounters in FF14. This is just a recent example. So, terrain flagging is a nice bonus. What happens then if you don't have it? Well, you end up with something like old school RuneScape. While some encounters have terrain flags, a large number of high-end encounters do not, leading players to make their own using Tile Markers, a third-party plugin that lets players mark tiles in whatever color they want, even adding labels. The fact that this is considered so important by most players really shows how a well-designed arena would have helped make these encounters far more readable and understandable to players without markers. But bringing it back to Fire Emblem, there are several maps that don't make good use of terrain flagging that could. That's not to say that you need to use it every time, but imagine for instance if the double move aggro range of wyverns in Chapter 7 of FE6 for instance was flagged by a forest, or at least a different color of basic terrain. It would be so much easier then to keep track of where you were aggroing them as a player, rather than having to manually count tiles every time you wanted to ensure your move was safe. So yeah, you don't have to do it with every map or every key enemy, and attempting to do so will likely result in more confusion than clarity. That said, if you have a unique mechanic, or it's the first time a player has seen something, or if everything else going on is difficult enough, then think about how the map elements themselves could help to ease some of the mental burden on the player. Because yes, In all of these examples, a player could just have a secondary reference open, or just memorize every square, or manually count out every time. But clever use of the assets you're already putting in can make your game a much smoother experience. Thank you for watching this first episode of Map Design 101. I'm branching out the series from units to cover a variety of other topics, so I hope you enjoy. Let me know what other specific questions you have about maps, and I'll look into putting them into the next video. Big shout out to Lagoo's members C2 Peekily, Enigmatic Mr. L, the Big Herman 007, NKO Rico, and the Bro Duderman for keeping the channel alive. And until next time, this is Mithril Zenith signing out.